We are back with another episode of Did You Know CIUS Answers, a response to your questions about Russia's war against Ukraine. Dr. Heather Coleman, Professor and Director of Graduate Programs, Department of History, Classics and Religion at the University of Alberta, and Director of the Program on Religion and Culture at CIUS, is with us today. Heather, tell me about the role of Catholicism in Ukraine.
Catholics form an important part of the religious mosaic of Ukraine. They make up just over 10% of the Ukrainian population. The vast majority of these Catholics are members of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church. Just under 1% of Ukrainians are actual Roman Catholics. The Greek Catholic Church is an Eastern Rite church. That means that it worships using Orthodox style liturgy and the parish clergy marry, but it is in union with the Roman Catholic Church. So it accepts Roman Catholic dogma and it's under the leadership of the Pope. But what's important is that it's not just numbers, it's the distribution of those numbers. Because although there are Catholics found all across the country, they are to a great extent concentrated in the Western region, where Catholicism is the predominant faith, and about 40% of the population are Catholics. Ukraine then is a Catholic country, and that has been an important feature of the religious response. And when we speak about the response of the Catholic Church to the war, we can speak on the one hand of Catholics in Ukraine on the ground, and on the other of the Roman Catholic Church as an international institution. The church has responded pastorally to the war on the ground, but it's also faced major political questions about how to approach the conflict as a church with a universal vision.
Because of their position in the West, what kind of a role have the Catholics played regarding the outpouring of refugees from Ukraine?
Oh, the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church and its clergy and its people have played a really important role because they live in the Western regions through which and to which many people have fled from Eastern and Central Ukraine and Southern Ukraine. The Church has played a really critical role in hosting refugees and displaced people of all religious denominations and of no faith either. So from the very first days of the war, for example, monasteries and local parish churches across Western Ukraine have provided temporary housing, first aid, food, pastoral support of various kinds. It was a really steep learning curve. Parish priests and their flock are learning on the fly how to manage the logistics of receiving and distributing humanitarian aid donated by Catholic aid groups across the world. For example, there's Caritas Ukraine, which is a member of the Alliance of Catholic Relief and Development Agencies, these Caritas agencies across the world. And Caritas Ukraine has 30 local organizations throughout the country. And in the first 5 months of the war, those organizations helped over 1.3 million people with humanitarian aid on the one hand and psychosocial support of various sorts on the other. The concentration of churches and communities and monasteries in the West has been really critical. Through Caritas and through the chaplaincy system, Catholics have also been very involved across the country since the beginning of the war in Donbass in 2014. They've been very involved with peace building. The Catholic Church is also present on the front lines of the conflict, has been since 2014 in the Donbass and now throughout the country. There are military chaplains who minister to the troops. And after the full-scale February invasion, the Greek Catholic Church really had to quickly but seriously think about how to minister to people in conditions of war, a church that always wants to preach peace. They published something called the Catechism of a Christian Soldier, and this is a booklet that helps both chaplains on the one hand and soldiers by explaining the foundations of Christian teaching, but also discussing the moral aspects of military service in conditions of war. So in various ways, the church has been on the ground supporting both the refugees, but also the Ukrainians who are finding themselves on the front line.
How has the Vatican responded to the war?
Well, that has been very complex because Ukrainian Catholics are, of course, part of a broader world church. And we've witnessed Pope Francis attempting to steer a course that balances the Vatican's traditional aim to be a peacemaker that stands above politics, with defense of his flock in Ukraine, and with a desire to continue ongoing ecumenical relations with the Russian Orthodox Church. Ever since the 1960s and Vatican II, the Roman Catholic Church has put a lot of effort into developing that relationship with the Russian Orthodox Church. And so in the early days of the war, we could see the Pope really trying to preserve that, and yet struggling with what was happening. And all of these goals of peacemaking, of ecumenical relationships, of defending of the flock, all of these are controversial in times of war. A good example is what happened on Good Friday, the very important moment just before Easter in the Christian calendar. Every year on Good Friday, the Pope leads a procession in Rome. And as the Vatican planned that procession, they planned to have a Ukrainian woman and a Russian woman together carrying a cross as a symbol and a gesture of reconciliation and of peacemaking. The widespread response among Ukrainian Catholics was hurt and disappointment. Many felt that the Vatican was not differentiating between victims and perpetrators. I remember a Ukrainian Catholic friend saying to me, but what about the church being on the side of the oppressed? And so there's a great tension when actual war comes in how to be a peacemaking institution. And then, as I mentioned earlier, meanwhile, you have this challenge of the Vatican's longstanding efforts to develop ecumenical relations with the Russian Orthodox Church. And those have really fallen on hard times. At the beginning of the war, Francis tried to use that relationship to call on the Patriarch Kirill of the Russian Orthodox Church to call for peace, to work for peace. Francis later canceled a planned meeting for, now I'm forgetting, the spring. It was supposed to be, I think, in May of 2022. And he warned Patriarch Kirill, quote, to not transform himself into Putin's altar boy. The interesting situation is that this cooling of ecumenical relations has also resulted in an important move that was seen as a show of support for the Ukrainians on March 25th, the Feast of the Annunciation. On that day, Pope Francis invited Catholic bishops around the world to pray a solemn act of consecration of Russia, Ukraine, and all humanity to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. Major Archbishop Sviatoslav, who is the head of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, had been requesting this act, had been requesting an act of consecration since the outbreak of war in the Donbass in 2014. But the Vatican had resisted because they knew that this would not be well received by the Russian Orthodox Church. When this moment came this March, it was very well received by Catholics in Ukraine. Archbishop Sviatoslav declared that it was, and I'll quote, the moment when we believe that good will win through the prayers of the Mother of God. But other observers suggested that by implying that the Pope had universal authority in this region, that this act would definitely cool ecumenical relations with the Russian Orthodox Church. So the war is really causing a major repositioning of the Catholic Church in its relationships in Eastern Europe. And this is a story that's unfolding as we talk. And indeed, the Ukrainian Catholic University, an important institution in Lviv in Western Ukraine, recently held a conference precisely to talk about the fate of the Catholic Church's so-called Ostpolitik, its relationships in Eastern Europe in the face of this tragic war.
Thank you, Heather. Indeed, the story continues to unfold with everything with this war. Thank you for your time today. Thank you for joining us on Did You Know?